It's Ashley from Sweet Dreams Bake Shop, and welcome back to my channel where I make a lot of cake and cookie decorating tutorials, as well as give a lot of baking business tips. And we are going back to the basics today with a requested video all about what type of ingredients should you actually stock your pantry with if you're starting out as a home baker or just a hobby baker. Now, this is definitely something that I struggled with a lot. I'm sure many of us have been faced with that, where we open up a recipe and we're like, oh, don't have that ingredient, don't have that one, what should I do? So today I'm going to be talking to you all about the basics that I have on hand all of the time, where I can actually use them to make decorated sugar cookies, decorative cakes, and a bunch of other recipes as well. So let's get into it. So the first thing I want to cover is flours. Now, there's so many different types of flours that you're going to come across. Firstly, you're probably going to come across recipes that call for all-purpose flour. Now, all-purpose flour is definitely a staple. I highly recommend that you buy this particular product in bulk because it's something that doesn't go bad that easily, and you can honestly use it for so many other things. And not just for baking either, you're probably going to use it for cooking as well. The next type of flour that you might hear about is cake flour. And you're probably wondering, well, what's the difference between cake and pastry flour and all-purpose flour? Because a lot of the time I find that cake recipes do call for cake and pastry flour. Now, my personal vanilla cake recipe that I love using all of the time does call for cake and pastry flour, but I often sub it for all-purpose flour. Now, you're probably wondering, well, how do I know when I can actually sub that ingredient? The truth of the matter is that your cake and pastry flour gives the cake itself a little bit of a lighter crumb. It's very pleasant and it tastes great when you use cake and pastry flour in cakes, but it does, in my opinion, make it a little bit more fluffy. So I like to sub for the all-purpose flour, especially when I'm doing highly decorative cakes. Do I keep both on hand? Not really. I normally now just keep my all-purpose flour on hand unless I'm making something really specific. The other type of flour that you might hear about is self-rising flour. And I actually bought a little pouch of self-rising flour because a particular recipe called for it. Honestly, it was just kind of a waste of time for me. I really feel like you can add in your own leavening agents, and for the most part, most recipes nowadays are written with just all-purpose flour. There's definitely a place for all of these different types of flours. I just find that when you're making decorative cakes or sugar cookies and you're actually running a home baking business, you want to be able to buy something in bulk and have it on hand at all times. And for many of us, we don't have large spaces to categorize all of these different types of flours. If you do, by all means, go ahead and keep them on hand. I just find that I can definitely get by with only all-purpose flour. The other types of flours that you might come across are things like tapioca flour or almond flour or different types of nut flours. These things, when I was running my home baking business, I would just buy for the occasion. So in general, because I do make a lot of macarons, I did have almond flour on hand for the most part, but never in bulk. The reason is because almond flour goes bad. Now, it doesn't go bad super easily. I'm sure if you leave it for a few weeks or even months, you're gonna be fine, but there is technically an expiration on it. So that's why I never really bought it in bulk. I just like to keep it nice and fresh. Now, that being said, you can buy almond flour in bulk and then store it in your fridge. Again, though, the reason that I personally didn't do this was because I don't have the type of space to have that much almond flour on hand. And if you don't buy it in those bulk packages, then it really is very expensive anyway if you're buying just a little bit more than the average bag that you find at your local grocery store. So that is the reason why I purchased the smaller bags and just kind of bought them as I needed them. The next things are pretty basic. You're going to need baking soda. You're also going to need baking powder. You need these leavening agents. Another leavening agent that I feel not everybody has on hand, but maybe if you are a home baking business or you do like to do a lot of baking, you should probably have some dry active yeast on hand or some sort of yeast starter. The reason is because if you want to make anything like donuts or bread or cinnamon rolls and you're really into baking, I definitely would get those things. Now, I don't necessarily use yeast in any of the products that I actually sold, but as somebody who does enjoy baking, not just for business, I definitely like to have that on hand. Let's talk about salt. Now, you might just be thinking, don't we just have salt and call it a day? Well, the truth is, when it comes to baking, I find the salt content is what makes things really special. I like to do a lot of different things though, like salted caramels. I love adding salt to my chocolate chip cookies, but it's not as simple as just having salt. I like to have table salt on hand. Of course, this is great for a lot of things. It's very versatile, but I will say that in terms of kicking up that flavor, especially for something like a salted caramel, I want to use something like fleur de sel or Himalayan sea salt. So I actually like to keep a selection of salts on hand. And the reason that I do this is because you don't need to have a bunch of salt in bulk. If you're going through bulk amount of salt, we gotta talk about your baking. But as we know, if you are a baker or you are a chef or a cook or just a hobby baker or cook, then you know that a little bit of salt goes a long way. So the quality of your salt does matter. The next thing that I like to always keep on hand is a selection of chocolate. So I always buy my chocolate in bulk. I buy the dark chocolate specifically in bulk. This is a good quality chocolate. It melts down easily, it covers cake pops well, it does drips well, and I also tend to use dark chocolate in a lot of my baking, like chocolate chip cookies, or I like to put these chocolate curls on top of a cake, or I transform it into a ganache. I also like to make sure that I have a lot of candy melts on hand. Now the candy melts, I use them for drips. I also use them to cover cake pops and cakesicles, but I also like to have it on hand just in case I have a really stubborn piece that's really large of a fondant figure or something else that's quite heavy that isn't sticking properly to a cake and I need a lot of support fast. I will use something like candy melts to quickly melt them down because they're very, very quick to melt in the microwave. This is why I don't just use white chocolate or a good quality chocolate, because candy melts have that really great structure right away without me having to temper anything. So it's great for actually sticking on difficult fondant stuff that's not just sticking with the steam, which you guys know that I like to use, or it's not sticking with the edible glue. I also like to use it if I'm making wedding cakes that are supposed to be transported far, far away. I put those candy melts in the center of each layer to make sure that everything is super, super solidified and that thing is not going to move. So candy melts are more so not just for the dipping, although I do use them for that, but they're great for something when you need really, really quick edible structure. I always make sure that I have heavy whipping cream. I also make sure to have whole milk, always whole milk. I never do skim just because I feel whenever I use skim in my recipes, it doesn't work out as well. And I find that even though some recipes do call for partly skimmed milk to be used if you're being health conscious, I find that if you use whole milk in things, you're never going to go wrong. Whereas if you use skim milk in things where it's supposed to be the other way around, it doesn't turn out as nicely. The next thing I want to talk about is sugars. Sugars is super, super important. I'm sure most of us right now, without even looking in our cupboards, know that we have some form of sugar. Now, I always use just regular granulated sugar. Again, this is something that I would buy in bulk. I would make sure to have this on hand because it's not going to go bad. And especially at the rate that I'm using it, it's definitely not going to go bad. And I make sure to store it in this big jar here. Now, honestly, this isn't the best way to store it. I definitely think I should invest in something bigger like what I have for my flour, but this is what I have, so I'm going to use it. I also always make sure to have brown sugar on hand. I do a lot of things with caramelization and a lot of things that you guys don't see on camera. I like to make cookies and I find that the brown sugar gives every cookie that I make a really nice, chewy, sumptuous bite. So that's why I always like to have brown sugar as well. And in case I, for some reason, run out of granulated sugar, that brown sugar really, really saves me, especially when I want to make my brown sugar Italian meringue buttercream. I also always make sure to have a surplus of icing sugar on hand as well. Now, I'm sure you've seen those videos where you can make your own icing sugar in case you run out, and in a desperate time, I definitely would do that, but more than likely, I would just buy the powdered sugar. And for some reason, I find that some of our stores around here run out of the stuff, so it's best to always make sure that you stock up. The next thing I want to talk about is vanillas. I always have vanilla extract on hand. Now, I am so sad that the days have passed where our grocery stores used to have vanilla bean on hand all the time. They had these great Tahitian vanilla beans that were on hand. Of course, they were a little bit more expensive, but I'm telling you guys, when we were able to scrape out those pods and put it into your buttercreams or put it into your ganaches, oh, it made such a difference. Unfortunately, we don't have that anymore. So I do keep different types of vanillas on hand. You guys have probably seen this where I've shown you a giant jug of just vanilla extract, and the reason is because this jug is imitation vanilla extract. I tend to put this into the actual things that are going to be baked. You notice a hint of a vanilla flavor. Even when I use the good stuff in my baking, you always just notice a hint of vanilla flavor. So I always feel like, why am I going to waste this, you know, really expensive vanilla in something that's just going to be baked through and it's going to lose some of that vanilla taste. And it's really just to give a vanilla essence to your baked goods. So I tend to use that when I'm just baking it right in, or I'm making something like pancakes or waffles. Then I'm going to use the cheaper vanilla. Now this vanilla, which is a pure vanilla extract, that's something that I would definitely use in a buttercream or something else where the flavor profile will not be diminished. Now if I want to get really fancy, then I use my vanilla bean paste, and the vanilla bean paste adds a really, really great flavor. This would be for something more like a whipped cream or something that is really, really fancy. I tend to shy away from using this on my actual decorated cakes because I feel like that's not really the focus. But when I'm doing like a dinner party dessert and I really want the flavors to be highlighted more so than the decor, then I will use the vanilla bean paste or real vanilla bean if I can get my hands on it. I also always have cocoa powder on hand, and this kind of falls into the category of chocolate, but I really always have this on hand because it's part of my chocolate cake recipe, and I really only use it for that, I notice. Now we're kind of getting into more of the decor elements, but I always have fondant on hand. You guys know this, I love satin ice. I have fondant on hand at all times. Usually I have it in bulk in white because this is what I like to decorate with, and I dye it. I also always have shortening on hand and butter. Shortening and butter are all of the things that I need at all times. My butter budget is probably like sky high right now because I'm making so many cakes and so many cookies all of the time, and I really spend the majority of my budget on butter. And I always make sure that I have shortening on hand because I often use this when I am decorating. It's a great way to kind of liven up your fondant and make it easier to work with. And finally, the last thing that I always have on hand is cornstarch. Again, this is more of a decorating thing. It's not so much of a baking thing. Very rarely do I find cornstarch actually in a recipe. I personally always use it to actually decorate my cakes. But occasionally I have come across things like a macaron recipe where there is an element of cornstarch in there. Now you'll notice I didn't say a lot about things like fruits and fresh things like that. I tend to not keep those things on hand. I just have the very basic things to make vanilla or chocolate flavored things. If it's going to be something special, then I need to go out and buy it. And that's why if you guys have watched my pricing videos, I make it a point to make sure that if there's anything requested that is a fruit filling or something that I don't normally have, of course you would raise your prices for something like that. Now I briefly want to talk about storage and stocking up. I know throughout the video I've shown you guys how I actually store these things, and I have to admit it's not a very pretty way of storing things, and I've briefly talked about this before in other organization videos, but in terms of when you're actually running a home baking business, you don't need it to look beautiful, you need it to be utilitarian and actually work for you. So as I mentioned in another video, sorry guys, there's just so many videos. I've definitely said some of these things, but as I've mentioned before, I'd rather all of my decorating stuff be on display and look beautiful while utilitarian, and I just like having my ingredients tucked away and have something that I can access. But like I said, I'm still working on it. Like the sugars, I find I need a way bigger bin for all of these things, but it's all about working within your space. Now in terms of stocking up, you never ever want to run into a problem of running out. And I gotta say, in the beginning, I ran out of stuff so much. This is about being ahead of the game, because if you're not ahead of the game, chances are you're gonna fall behind somewhere, and it's probably going to cause you to lose sleep somewhere down the line. I am pretty good at time management, and I still have these things happen to me all of the time. So whenever I'm running even a little bit low, like maybe let's say I have a quarter of ingredients left, I definitely make sure to stock up right away. You just never want to be in a situation where you're like, oh, I can get away with it and I'll use this last little bit, and you know, the next time I'm out, then I'll grab something. No. You want to make it a point that when you do have the time, you stock up. Even if maybe you still have half a container left of icing sugar, still stock up. So I hope you guys enjoyed that, and I hope that gave you a really good insight on what kind of basic things you'll probably need if you want to run a cake or cookie decorating company, or if you just want to know what somebody who bakes on a regular basis has in their pantry. Now, of course, this is really just my own opinion, and this is what I have in my pantry, but why don't you guys let me know down in the comments below, what do you have in your pantry that I didn't even talk about? Thanks so much for watching, guys. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you can be part of the Sweetie fam. Right now, I'm uploading weekly, so make sure you hit that notification bell so you know when I upload. Also, be sure to comment, request, or ask a question. I love hearing from you guys.
Bye. Bye-bye.